71.
We should probably get started then.
Okay, great.
I want to start with that video, Julia.
I'm Kim Davenport from Edward Street, and I'm honored to be on the board of the Worcester Education Collaborative. Time and time again, WEC steps to the plate for Worcester students with an uncompromising focus on excellence and equity in our educational system. They know what it takes, and they take action. WEC knows it takes funding. This year, WEC advocated for the Student Opportunity Act to bring money back to Worcester Public Schools to rebalance years of financial need. WEC knows it takes leadership. Each year, they help the community celebrate Worcester Public Schools principals through their Principal for a Day program, where leaders get to see firsthand what it takes to deliver on a promise of a quality education. They also invest in new leaders through their design of the Educational Day for Leadership Worcester. WEC knows that it takes community to support schools in solving entrenched problems. WEC harnesses the community through its board, through the Education Equity Roundtable, and more recently through the development of WU Labs, an educational enrichment model that can transform out-of-school time learning. Finally, WEC knows it takes you, all of us, to care about education and invest to ensure all students have the quality education they deserve for school and lifelong success. Thank you, WEC, for your thought leadership across our community, your collaboration with partners, and your relentless pursuit of excellence on behalf of Worcester students.
Hi everyone, my name is Liz Hamilton. I'm the Executive Director of the Boys and Girls Club of Worcester. I want to wish Worcester Education Collaborative a very happy 10th anniversary. When I think about what you all have been able to accomplish in just a short amount of time, it really is very, very impressive. Worcester Education Collaborative played an integral role when it came to bringing the community together and listening to students and parents' voices regarding the strategic plan for Worcester Public Schools. And I'm so grateful for what you were able to accomplish with so many different people. In addition, one of my favorite programs that you put on every year is the Principal for the Day program. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to be the principal for Burncoat Middle School. And let's just say, made a few changes and, well, I mean, the school's still standing, so I think I did a pretty good job. But probably when you ask my kids what they really have enjoyed the most with you is the reading program, where you send in community readers to come in and read really great books with our kids and really encourage them to become lifelong readers. Thanks for what you have done for our community, and I look forward to working with you for another 10 years.
As one of the great initiatives, we are very appreciative of the Reading Together program, which enabled our families and students to come together to engage in various activities for reading with your parent, providing free books for all of our students in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, as well as an opportunity to learn more about reading at home and to build up students' home libraries. We want to thank the Worcester Educational Collaborative for all the wonderful opportunities you have provided for Woodland Academy, and we appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Hi, this is Maureen Benenda. I'm the superintendent of Worcester Public Schools. I want to say that I appreciate the Worcester Educational Collaborative for their work with the Worcester Public Schools in helping us develop the strategic plan and working collaboratively with us to go forward and make sure that the strategic plan goals are met. Also, they've really made a positive effect on our elementary school students by providing reading books 4 times a year to students in 4 of our schools, and also informing our families on how to do read-alouds to their children. I want to thank WEC for continuing to look for financial avenues to further support our work. It's a team effort to improve our schools, and I want to thank you and have a happy 10th anniversary.
As Executive Director and CEO of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau, I've been honored by the opportunity to work with Jen and the Worcester Education Collaborative. Our organizations were partners in the development of the innovative strategic plan for the Worcester Public Schools and continue to collaborate on the importance of the plan's implementation. We work together with the Mayor, Superintendent, Public Schools, and School Committee to highlight the importance of the State Student Opportunity Act funding. During the pandemic, WEC's leadership has been crucial in convening the Worcester Education Equity Roundtable to bring together education stakeholders from across the city. Beyond WEC's organizational commitment to supporting all Worcester Public School students, I want to personally commend Jennifer Davis Carey for her focus, drive, and aspirational vision on ensuring that our entire community be at the forefront of educational innovation. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, WEC, for everything you do.
So thank you, everyone, and welcome to a very bizarre, but I guess commonplace way to have an annual meeting these days. Those comments were just beautiful, and we are very excited to be celebrating our 10th anniversary here. This is our 11th annual meeting, and we are so grateful for everyone who supports education in our community. You make the work of organizations like WEC valuable, sustainable, and possible. As we know, students in Worcester face many obstacles to achieving their educational goals. 2020 has made those barriers even higher, but working together to overcome these obstacles has made us stronger as a community. You will hear about our work that has continued through the pandemic from our Executive Director, Jen Carey. We also have such powerful, relevant speakers today who will share their expertise and also guide us through conversations about how we as a community can have an even greater impact in the lives of our children. I'm very proud to say that I've been part of WEC since its inception. Many on the board and on this Zoom work to create an organization that has at its core the desire to ensure that an excellent education is the right of each and every child. On the screen is a list of our board members, all of whom work tirelessly to achieve this vision. 8 of our members are founding trustees, and I am especially grateful for their long-term commitment and dedication to our mission. As is true of all annual meetings, we have a small bit of board business to conduct before we move to the program. To my colleagues on the WEC board, is there a motion to convene our 11th annual meeting?
Motion to convene.
Is there a second?
Second.
In favor? Thank you.
Aye.
Aye.
We're very excited to add 2 new board members to our board. Kim Salmon from the Hanover Insurance Foundation and Ron Waddell from Legendary Legacies. Is there a motion to elect Kim and Ron to the board?
So moved.
Motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're very excited to welcome you, Kim and Ron. You will be great additions to what is already an incredible board. I'd also like to entertain a motion to accept our slate of officers. As you'll see, starting in a few minutes, Kate Salmon-Robinson will serve as chair, Kim Davenport as vice chair, Greg Byrne as treasurer, and Allison Chisholm Hansen as our secretary. Is there a motion to accept this slate of officers?
So moved.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 I'd like to recognize some of our trustees who are retiring now. Tom Conroy from Worcester State is retiring from his board service, and Charlie Gruska will retire and serve on our advisory board. I'd also like to offer a special thanks to Patsy Lewis, who is stepping down from a long tenure as our board secretary. Thank you all. Thank you to the board. Thank you to our partners and supporters for your continued support. I'd now like to turn the meeting over to our Executive Director, Jen Davis Carey.
Hi, good evening, everyone. First, I'd like to begin by thanking the board and specifically the members of the planning committee for this event for helping us all to gather today for WEC's first go at a virtual annual meeting. Hats off to Allison, to Steve, to Dawn, to Naomi, to our new deputy director, Julia, and to Kate. And special kudos to Josh, who kept us all singing from the same hymnal and rowing in the same direction. I apologize for that mixed metaphor. 23 days until we can all say goodbye to 2020, the plague year, the year of uprisings, the year of fires, the year of drought, the year of political upheaval, the year when bills came due, the year of change, upheaval, chaos, and yes, of revelation and of awakening. The year 2020 has exposed the fissures, fractures, and inadequacies in every sector of American society. And these revelations have seeded an awakening. The belief that we absolutely must work to reimagine a new and better system, new policies, new approaches, and yes, new attitudes that can work for all people. And at the heart of that reimagination, there are some things on which we critically need to focus. As you know, I always look at things through the lens and vantage point of education. And from my vantage point at the Worcester Education Collaborative, as we and as a community and a district reimagine how we accomplish teaching and learning, we must be guided in that work by the centering of the child and their needs and gifts along the lines and principles of equity. The seeds for this type of reimagination are taking root in Worcester. As we respond to the multiple bills that have come due, we have come together in a shared response. Witness the Worcester Together Fund, the Black Lives Matter mural, the Worcester Mutual Aid Facebook page, and in the education ecosystem, the emergence of the Worcester Education Equity Roundtable. For WEC, the work of reimagination is not new work. We have always held as our North Star, not what is merely acceptable for our children, but what is possible. Tonight, we will consider what can be accomplished through the interplay of education and technology. Our work, however, goes beyond that to seek what is possible when the community is fully behind our kids and our schools, and when our schools are fully allied with our community. In March of this year, WEC began its 11th year of operation. While our work with the schools and communities have borne fruit, a strategic plan, a strong literacy program in 7 of our schools, and an ongoing series of community briefings, a community of practice for the education ecosystem, a social and emotional learning training program, our work is ongoing. Thanks to all of you, to our financial supporters, and to those who offer their time and expertise to assure that this important work is accomplished. Tonight, both special and heartfelt thanks are due to Patty Eppinger. Patty has served as our resolute and unflappable board chair since 2015. Smart, visionary, politically savvy, and yes, fearless, she has guided WEC to maturity. She is a good friend and a professional support and patient beyond words. She saved me multiple times from fleeing onto Main Street to shout at randomly passing cars. Patty will be stepping down this year, but she will remain on the board in a new role. We are looking forward to continue to work with her. Patty, many, many thanks. And let's have a virtual round of applause for this wonderful woman. I'd like to remind everyone that we have a silent auction going. So if you log on to that, we'll put that in the chat. And I urge you, we are trying to both be able to support our organization, but also to support our local businesses. So all of the items that you'll see are Central Massachusetts focused. So please take a look at that. That will be closing at 7. And we'll give folks a warning before we close that. I'd also like Josh now to play our second video, and then we'll go into our speakers for the evening. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, this is Kate Lowenstein from Citizens for Juvenile Justice, and we are just delighted to send our heartfelt appreciation for all the fantastic work that you all do at the Worcester Education Collaborative. It is so tremendous to have an ally on the ground doing the wide range of work that you all do to bring together community members, experts in the field, schools, community-based resources, children, youth, and families to make sure that the children and families of Worcester get the very best that they deserve. It is so rare to have a nonprofit do so much to pull information together, to put information out, and to continuously advocate, relentlessly do what is right, and really be a connector to all of us who so deeply want to help and be part of the solution. You all make that possible, and for that we are so grateful. Congratulations on 10 years. We are so lucky to have you.
I've watched personally many people and business owners, but also community advocates get behind the work of the Worcester Education Collaborative because we're trying to build a better system for our city and for our young children that live here, and it's going to it gets done by a village. It doesn't just get done by a school department. It doesn't just get done by a school committee. It doesn't get done by business. It gets done by everybody coming together, and I am so proud of the work that Worcester Education Collaborative has done in terms of catalyzing the conversation, working on the strategic plan. Jen Davis Carey has been the executive director. She has been amazing. She is completely engaged in helping to transform the education in our city for our students and our residents to the best it can be, and to be the bridge between the school system. I think together, the school committee, the school department, and the outside community can really make a difference in Worcester. And I'm not sure how it would happen if we didn't have Worcester Education Collaborative to help us get there. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Trip Jones, the founder and principal of 21C, and a longtime friend and fan of the Worcester Education Collaborative. It's such a pleasure to be able to be a part of your celebration highlighting the important work the organization does. I want to start by just saluting my very good friend, Jen, your leader. We've had the privilege of working together now for decades on a number of important issues facing the state. And I think so highly, Jen, of your professionalism, the commitment you have to your work, your integrity. And I love the fact that we're still working together and that we got a lot more to do. So thank you, my friend. I love the Worcester Education Collaborative for a number of reasons, starting with the fact that you've got this extremely important commitment to taking on the issues related to inequality in our state and expanding opportunities for students that don't have the kind of opportunities they deserve in our schools today. So thank you for that. I have so much respect for the work you do to build community, to bring organizations together to get aligned around a bold and practical agenda for how to do better. I think so highly of your commitment to evidence-based practices that are grounded in good data and analysis. And I, of course, appreciate your work, not just to focus on making change in the Worcester area, but also across Massachusetts. I've had the privilege of being able to work with you to help to shape and build, for example, the work that the Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership is doing to forge a broader statewide agenda to address inequality and opportunity in Massachusetts. And you have played such a key role in that. And I see on a regular basis how much other organizations respect and follow your lead in helping to shape what they're doing. So many, many thanks. Again, I very much appreciate the opportunity to collaborate on a regular basis. And I am grateful for the opportunity to share my 2 bits and to celebrate all that you've been able to do. So congratulations and onward.
The question we've been asked to consider is, what do we appreciate the most about WEC? And I would say that collaboration, that's what I appreciate most about WEC. They do the hard work of building relationships, of talking to people in the community. And they do that work in the recognition that that is how we center excellence and equity. That as long as we have a system where kids are going to have different outcomes because of their race, because of their gender, because of their ability status, that those things are stifling all of our kids. If we want excellence, we can't have anybody left behind or marginalized. And centering that belief in those students is what's going to lead to equity. And that's what's going to lead to social change. If we really want a better environment for our kids, it starts with creating the best schools we can have. And so we're so grateful and appreciative for the work you do. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you. Now it's time for our keynote speaker. I'd like to now introduce Joseph South. Joseph is the Chief Learning Officer with ISTE, the International Society for Technology and Education. Prior to his current role, he served as the Director of the Office of Educational Technology at the U.S. Department of Education under President Obama. In his role at the department, he was an advisor to the Secretary of Education and developed national technology policy, formed public-private partnerships to assist state and local education leaders in transitioning to digital learning, helped school districts expand to the use of openly licensed educational resources, and collaborated with stakeholders to nurture a robust system of ed tech entrepreneurs and innovators. Joseph is a strategic national educational technology leader who is focused on education-based learning transformation. So Joseph, you have the floor.
Great, let me share my screen. All right, we good there? Awesome. So I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. This is an amazing group of folks to be presenting to. I'm so impressed with the collaboration and the work that you're doing together, that you've got a cross-sector group here that's all working towards a common goal. And it's just a pleasure to be invited to speak with you tonight. So tonight, I want us to think a little bit about the future. And to do that, we're going to think first a little bit about the past. So this last January, the last place that I was able to go before COVID hit, I took a trip to the Outer Banks with my 2 boys. It was really, really cold there. January is a cold time to be at the beach, but we still managed to have a lot of fun. We actually stayed just a mile or so from Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And one of the things that you notice immediately when you're in this area is the wind just blows constantly. I looked it up, and in January, the average wind speed was 14.5 miles per hour. And in September, it blows even harder. It's averaging about 16 miles an hour. So why do I know that esoteric fact? Well, because this is exactly why Wilbur and Orville Wright chose Kitty Hawk to conduct their flying experiments. They wanted the steady wind. The other 2 criteria were water and sand for soft landings. I'm not making that up. So until they came on the scene, This is what flying machines looked like. And they were pretty much gigantic disappointments. And they also looked a little silly, but even worse than that, they were pretty dangerous. I think if you think about the folks in these contraptions, I can't see these ending well for these people. The other thing that you'll notice about these flying machines is there's something common about all of them. And that is that they're trained really, really hard to look and act exactly like a bird in flight. That was what the people had studied. It's what they understood. And it made sense because at the time, birds knew how to fly and people didn't. So the question they were asking is, how do we make a human as much like a bird as possible? And this way of thinking is what I call the copy and paste mentality. And we do it all the time. We look at something that's working for someone else or something else in a totally different context, and we try and copy and paste that into the world that we're entering. And it doesn't always turn out well. The Wright brothers had a really different approach. They didn't know a lot about birds. In fact, they knew all about birds, but that wasn't the only thing they were thinking about. They were also thinking about bicycles. So why were they thinking about bicycles? Because bicycles, designing and building bicycles was their day job. That's what the Wright brothers did when they weren't off in Kitty Hawk trying to learn how to fly. And they noticed something about bicycles. There were principles about controlling a bicycle that were intriguing to them. So as all of you know from scrapes and scratches and scars you have from your childhood, a bicycle is inherently unstable, right? It doesn't stabilize itself, but there's ways you can control it when it's in motion that stabilizes it. And they started to ask this question. Instead of asking how do we make a human as much like a bird as possible, they asked, how do you control an inherently unstable object in motion? And when they reframed the question, it unlocked everything for them, because suddenly they realized that while their physical bodies were not like birds and the motion of a glider wasn't at all like a bird, the way you controlled a moving bicycle was the same principles you could use to control a glider, just in 3 dimensions. And what's fascinating about this is not only did they make history with this principle, but almost every single flying machine that followed them follows the same principle. These are things they couldn't even imagine at the time, all building from this insight that they had. And it really came because they were able to break through from that copy and paste mentality and go to a new place. And so it's really easy to find ourselves in a deficit-based framing. The idea that birds can fly and we can't, and we've got to be as much like a bird as we can be, is really looking at our deficits, as opposed to how the Wright brothers looked at things, which was saying, we know how to control an inherently unstable object in motion. We know the principles of that. We know it's a new context. We know things aren't exactly the same, but can we apply those principles? And so they brought with it all the assets that they had to this problem, which allowed them to think about it in a new way. So right now, it seems to me that the question that we tend to be asking is, how do we do school remotely? And there's always an at the end of that, because that's how everybody's feeling. And that's a copy and paste mentality. And it's kind of amazing how deep this goes. The problem with a copy and paste mentality is it's full of terrible assumptions. So the first is that you have the same constraints, which you really don't. They're entirely different. There are constraints when you're working remotely or using technology extensively for learning, but they're different than classroom constraints. You think you have the same opportunities, but those are quite different as well. And the most dangerous one of all, I think, is you make an assumption that you've already optimized the system for the best possible outcomes. There can be nothing better than a flapping bird, because all I've seen are flapping birds. It must be the best way to do this. And what happens is you can make a mistake where we confuse the familiar and the comfortable with equitable and effective. Before the pandemic, I never heard anybody saying, our public schools are so amazing. In fact, they're perfect. I don't want to change a thing about them. They're great. That's not what we were saying. But that's kind of what we're saying now. All I hear is we got to get back to the classroom where everything's awesome. Well, everything wasn't awesome in the classroom. There are things that are worse. I get that. But there's some things that might actually be better. When you think only about the deficit, then you spend an inordinate amount of time thinking in terms of copy and paste. How do we take attendance? Do you know how frustrated teachers are with the amount of time they're spending taking attendance? I know a teacher who says he takes almost 10 minutes out of every teaching hour doing this. It's a copy and paste mentality. Preventing cheating. Teachers are so worried that these kids are now going to cheat because they're all by themselves. Well, kids were cheating before who wanted to cheat, and the kids who weren't probably weren't. And what about the idea that maybe we could make assignments where they work together and they collaborated? So instead of trying to keep them away from the other students, we actually were bringing them together. But when you have a copy and paste mentality, you're just thinking, how do I stop the cheating? And you spend all your time fighting disengagement, Zoom fatigue, and falling behind. Now, these are real things. I don't mean that they're not, but there's a way of thinking about them that I think can be limiting. So how do we move from a deficit-based framing to an asset-based framing? So, one way is to think about the problem maybe differently. So, when we look back on the pandemic, will we ask ourselves, was this an historic disruption or a historic acceleration? Now, when I ask that question, you may think that I'm crazy because the answer is clearly disruption. And everybody who's sitting at home right now watching me on a little teeny box without a very nice dinner in front of themselves is pretty sure this is a disruption. But in terms of educational technology, this is a huge acceleration. The kinds of changes to teaching and learning that digital technologies were bringing to the classroom were coming. And we've just leapt into the future 5 or 10 years all at once. Now, nobody wants to do that. I am the first person to say a long weekend is not enough time to transform your school with technology, not enough time. But the fact that we found ourselves here has actually accelerated a lot of things that normally take a very, very long time for a school to get through. The second question I think we need to ask ourselves is, do we really want to go back to how it was? Or do we want to take this opportunity to leap forward to how it should be? How many times have we said, oh, we want to try something new, but we're just shackled by those state tests. We just can't get away from them. And they dominate everything we do. Well, guess what? You got a waiver. So maybe we can't try something new. We have new opportunities, new configurations, new roles that people are taking on. That gets to the third question, which is, how do we capitalize on what went well? And now you may be trying to think of, maybe even one thing that went well. I know more pet time is top of the list for a lot of folks. But from a school point of view, there are a few silver linings. So number one, almost every educator I talk to says they have better teacher, parent, caregiver relationships than they've ever had. The parents or caregivers are way more involved than they've ever been. They're in communication with them. They know them, they see their faces. They come to parent-teacher conference because it's not held at 7 o'clock at night when they're working their second shift. It's a time when they can get on a call and they don't have to drive for an hour, take a bus to get there. Virtual IEP meetings have much better attendance than they used to have. And everybody's present and everybody can be there. We are finding that teachers have taken a huge leap forward in their capacity to use EdTech. I know principals who have begged and begged and begged their teachers to just try using some digital tools. And now every teacher, like it or not, is using those digital tools. And that capability isn't going to go away. We've now built up new capability that can be drawn upon. More student autonomy. There's actually some students who are doing better. Now, I know there's a lot of students who are doing worse, and there's a tremendous number of students who just disappeared. And those are really tragic. And I'm not diminishing that. However, it's also true that there's kind of been a shift in the way time is being used. And I've seen it in my own boys. I have 2 boys in school, public school, And one of them came to me and said, I don't know how to say this, Dad, but I like online school better. I have more control over my time. I'm able to get my work done faster. I spend a lot less time on the bus going to and from school, and have time to do other things that I care about. How can we capitalize on that feeling and push that, you know, every teenager has? They want to own things. How can we capitalize on that? More flexibility in time, location, and approach than we've ever had. Again, it was forced flexibility, but now there is more flexibility. We don't think about the same four walls of the classroom, right? That's always been a constraint. They're gone. And then last, we, for once, have the full attention of the state, the district, and the school leadership on this issue. And that doesn't usually rise to the top, and it has now. So it's a moment when we can get all eyes on the issues. So I'm going to propose a different question. Instead of asking, how do we do school remotely? Looking to the future, what if we reframe the question to be more asset-based and said, how do we design resilient learning systems? So by this, what I mean is building learning systems that can absorb shocks to the system without breaking, that are flexible and pliable. You know, there may be another pandemic. Even if there's not a pandemic, you're all in Massachusetts, you know about snowstorms. They can be just as devastating, hurricanes. There's all kinds of things that disrupt school. Can we build a system that's more resilient? And it's interesting, I think one of the things that this pandemic has shown us is how brittle our system is and how much it relies upon the teacher at the very center of that system. And when you are focused exclusively on the teacher, when they are the make or break part of learning, that it's easy to break. But one thing that a resilient learning system could do is expand the participation in that learning community. So there's more folks at the table, that the student takes a larger role, that it's more student-centered learning, that the parent or caregiver is invited to be part of that equation, a learning coach and a support, that the student counselors, the school counselors are part of that as well. And there's more of an open collaborative, and not to mention the community, the museums, and the science centers, and the businesses, all have a chance to be more a part of the learning that happens in a resilient learning system. The key to this, and what I feel like everyone needs to step back and do, and it's hard to do because we've been so focused on the technology for so long, is to say, what are our learning goals? What are we trying to accomplish? Ask that question first, and then ask, now how do we bring the technology to bear to accomplish those learning goals? When we do that, we find that there are reasons to have technology in the face-to-face classroom. There are reasons to consider hybrid environments, where even in a classroom, you have some kids working face-to-face and some kids working on a computer in the same room at the same time. And you're much more prepared if you need to go fully online in the case of some sort of emergency. So it's an opportunity to rethink some fundamental issues. So one is, how do we use our learning time? One thing that I've noticed is a lot of educators are still using the face-to-face time to lecture to the students. That's not how we have to use the time. We could provide pre-recorded videos, and maybe it's not even the teacher who does that, but online videos. There's some amazing history videos online, better than I could ever make myself as a teacher. Maybe the students look at those ahead of time, and then when you're face-to-face, you're collaborating, you're working together, you're going over the homework, you're answering questions, you're working on joint projects. It's just thinking about that time differently. Space, the classroom walls are gone. And I've seen teachers who have been able to reach out to famous musicians to be guest participants in their music class, because guess what? Famous musicians are stuck at home too. And so they've been able to take advantage of that. Or you know, connecting with a science center where they're rehabilitating sea turtles and taking kids on those science journeys. There's so many possibilities when space is no longer a constraint. Relationships, bringing in other students. I've seen a lot of sibling coaching going on, or other mentors being brought to bear. Assessments, we talked about earlier, What if they were more collaborative? What if they were more generative and less individual and isolating? So many possibilities here. So just 3 ideas that I'll just put on the table as ways to maybe think through how things might be different. Imagine if students were digital creators, where they would come to school and they would know that they were going to have opportunities when they fulfill an assignment to create something in a digital medium that was of their own choosing. This happened to me. A teacher was teaching my 3rd grade child at the time, and she said, "Hey, we want to we're going to have a review of weather. We're going to have a test on weather. We're going to have a review. Any one of you can make a review for your classmates in any format you want. Just go wild, whatever you want." And some kids, did worksheets. Other kids made videos. Other kids did little audio recordings. And my son, who's a little bit of a nerd, I don't know where he gets that from, he used Scratch, which you probably know is a free block coding software that allows little kids to write code easily. And he made a little quiz, a weather quiz, which would pop up a question with multiple choice answers and you could choose the right answer. Well, I've never seen my child more excited about the weather than he was making his weather quiz. And all the teacher had to do was open it up and say, create something. I'm going to give you the broad parameters, but you decide how you do this. Second idea is, what if teachers were more curators than content generators? What if they were able to spend their time finding great resources and we supported them in doing that instead of always having to generate them from scratch? How might that change their role, and might it open up new possibilities for them? And then last, what if learning was more personalized? Now, this is actually going to become very, very important as we move forward, because we know some kids are getting really far behind and further behind than other kids. And one thing that technology is actually really good at is personalizing instruction so that those students who are further behind can get extra help. There's just not enough teachers to go around to help every student wherever they are to get where they need to go. And so how can we imagine learning being more personalized than it's been in the past? When you come to Kitty Hawk and you feel the wind blow and you get a little sandblasted, it's really easy to think of that unrelenting wind as an obstacle to you. And had the Wright brothers thought about that wind as an obstacle that was out to destroy their glider, they never would have made the progress that they made. Instead, they thought of it as a force that they could master and use to keep their glider up in the air. And what I hope we can do is push through our deficit thinking to more asset-based thinking, think more about the future than the past, and ask ourselves, is there a way that we can take the buffeting winds of this pandemic that have blown us all into a new technologically driven world that none of us were anticipating, maybe not quite ready for, and instead of thinking that as something that could destroy us or something we want to flee, think of it as a force that we can master and one that we can actually soar on. So I hope moving forward we'll be thinking, how can we create resilient learning systems that take advantage of all that we've learned and bring those forward into this future to provide a better and more equitable education for our kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for those thoughtful remarks. The phrase I have taken away, and that is going to be on my Facebook page, is where would we be if the Wright brothers had considered the wind as an obstacle? Where would we be? We're going to shift a little bit in our program and do something different. We're going to have a chat, a fireside chat, we're calling it, between Joseph and Sarah Kyriasis. Sarah is the manager of instructional technology and digital learning for the Worcester Public Schools. Works daily with district and school leadership to leverage technology and innovation to meet the needs of all learners. Sarah was named the Math Q Administrator of the Year in 2019. and is an appointed member of the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education Digital Learning Advisory Council. She's also a member of the Google for Education K-12 North America Advisory Board. Sarah is a passionate educator who believes in empowering others to creatively lead outside the box. Sarah never says no, but she asks, how can we? So with that, I'm going to lob it over to Sarah.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. And it's good to see a lot of faces of people I've met over the last 8 months. And thank you, Joseph, for your keynote there. I wanted to, when Josh called me and asked me to help with this fireside chat, I was really excited to meet Joseph because ISTE is an integral part of our technology integration strategy in the Worcester Public Schools. I've lived in Worcester for over 20 years. I have 4 of my own children in elementary, middle, and high schools in the Worcester Public Schools, so I have the whole gamut covered. And when I started as the manager of instructional technology in 2017, my very first introduction into the Worcester Public Schools was WEC and the strategic plan. And I co-chaired the technology strand of the strategic plan with Sue Mailman, who I think is here, and Josh was on that committee. So I got to WEC has really been, by my side as we've started to integrate technology into the curriculum. When Joseph was talking about leveraging what's happening with the pandemic, it really is true because we've met all of those goals and exceeded some of them and are looking to really continue to build upon that and also sustain and improve. So ISTE shows up in our strategic plan that was written with the community. It also shows up in our technology plan, which is expiring this year. So we're going to be writing a new one for the Worcester Public Schools. The ISTE student standards are aligned with our K-12 digital literacy and computer science standards. And this is the first full year that we're implementing those in K-5 technology enrichment classes. In addition to that, we run a variety of instructional technology integration cohorts of teachers, of assistant principals, and now we have 3 cohorts of principals. So they look at the ISTE educator standards, the student standards, and the leader standards. So we're really trying to embrace everything that ISTE has to offer and all of the research that they've done both nationally and internationally. So thank you for that. I wanted to frame a little bit of how ISTE lives in Worcester. So Joseph, we have a couple of questions for you that we'd like to ask. The first one is, what are some best practices that we can learn here in Worcester that you're seeing in schools nationally and even internationally?
Well, first, Sarah, I just say how impressed I am by all that you're doing. The degree to which you've integrated the ISTE standards is remarkable. And it's great to hear how it's benefiting your work. And I know that is not easy, so hats off to you. So, I think the schools that are doing the best, one, they already had some sort of technology plan that they were executing, and so technology wasn't foreign to them. And I think that just gives them a head start. I think as well, some of the schools that are doing really well are actually working to build agency among their students. So for example, they have students who are in charge of leading Zoom breakout groups, right? And I hear other schools who are like, oh, Zoom breakout groups are a disaster. But in schools where they've actually given the kids the responsibility to make sure those work and work well and trusted them with it, they're seeing better outcomes. Another strategy that a lot of schools are using is EdTech coaches. EdTech coach is essentially somebody who can provide over-the-shoulder help to an educator, and they're making sure that there's one of those available, at least one per school, and making sure that they understand both the technology tools and the pedagogy that goes with them. And I think that's another approach that's been really, really effective.
That's great. Thanks for that. Unfortunately, we don't have the funding to have a technology coach in every school in Worcester, but we do have 7 district-wide. And what we have done is leverage the instruction teachers to be teacher leaders in the school. So we've really worked with teachers to take on that role. And hopefully if people keep advocating for the student kind of the SOA, then we can get there at one point. So number 2, how might we ensure that technology is a tool to advance equity instead of exacerbate inequities?
So I think there's 3 aspects of that. One is of course you have to overcome the digital divide, right? Which is those who have access to technology and those who didn't. When I was in the Obama administration, when I got there, there was about 30% of schools had broadband in the classroom. And we worked really, really hard over those years in public-private partnerships and got to where over 90% had broadband in the classrooms. But that is not the same as broadband at home. And so I think we have to realize that there are still, 15 million students who lack adequate access to devices or the internet at home. There's 400,000 teachers who lack that access. And you just aren't going to be able to overcome this until you overcome the digital divide. The second thing, though, is something that we talk about as the digital use divide. So what you'll find is that even when technology is available among students with lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they are asked to use technology more passively than students in higher socioeconomic circumstances who are asked to use technology more actively to solve or to create or to communicate or to share. And there's actually been studies that show that you learn less and you learn slower by using technology passively. So we really have to think about how do we use technology actively. And then third is educator capacity. We have to provide professional learning for our educators. And again, that's unequally distributed. And so what we find is schools with the most challenges have the least amount of preparation for their educators than others do.
Thank you. And then the last question that we have, and then I think it's going to be opened up to audience questions, are, so in Worcester, something that we're working on, there's a lot of people in this meeting that are working on that, both at the state level, I see Trip here, and then also in the city is really how can we close the digital internet divide. We were given money for the CARES Act, from the CARES Act, and we were able to provide hotspots, but that's a stopgap. We're looking for more sustainable. So what advocacy is happening nationally by ISTE or other organizations that you're affiliated with to advance policies around infrastructure and equity for not just students, but I think for all citizens?
Yeah, so we have been extremely active on the federal level right now. So one possibility that's brought up often is the E-rate funding.
Mm-hmm.
So E-rate funding is federal funding that significantly supplements providing internet access to schools. But there's no reason that Congress couldn't tweak that program and allow it to provide internet access to homes. And that would be a really logical vehicle with infrastructure already in place. That it's not perfect, but everybody knows how to get E-rate funds. So we've been advocating with the FCC and with Congress to put some additional funding into the E-rate program and change the permissions around it so that it could then support home access. So that's one thing. A second one is the Emergency Education Connections Act. That's one that's been proposed in Congress around connectivity that would provide significant federal dollars to cross those last mile areas, especially in rural areas of the country. And then we're also advocating for the use of ESSA funds. So as you know, ESSA is the law that governs K-12 education. And there's different parts of that law. And one of them, Title 4A, provides support for these kinds of activities. And so providing more funding for these existing vehicles, because what we find is if you create a new vehicle, it takes a long time for that federal infrastructure to kick in to actually get the money out. But if you can take an existing vehicle and tweak it for this purpose, it's much more effective.
We have a vehicle theme here, right? Planes, bicycles. I loved your point about the Wright brothers asking a different question. Do you think we're asking the right questions for the current climate? What should we be considering and what have we missed?
Yeah, that is a great question. I'm really concerned about a temporary mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like you know, when I would go camping as a youth, you know, I basically would go out there with a sleeping bag and a tarp, and it didn't really make me want to camp again. But you know, it makes me think of, you know, the whole world of glamping, right? I don't know if you've heard of glamping, but it's where people make these amazing tents with running, you know, hot water. And I think we have sort of a camping attitude, and we maybe need to switch to a glamping attitude, and say, this is not temporary. We're going to be here for a while, and we need to really invest in this. And instead of, you know, just waiting, you know, it's like anything in life. If you're just waiting for the pain to be over, you don't learn anything from the pain, right? And so I think we need to be asking, you know, what persists? How does this make things more equitable? And which things do I want to use no matter what the future looks like? And how can I bring those back?
That's so true. When we work with teachers and principals, we often go back to Shine's organizational culture, which says that culture is created out of a group's challenges and those solutions that they've found. And so we say, what are the challenges? What are the solutions that we're trying to find? And let's carry those through post-pandemic. So let's not lose some of the things like the family and community connections that we've made. So you talked about teachers as curators moving into the future. What are some ways we can evolve our systems of educating educators considering this?
So it's a great question. So one option is openly licensed educational resources, right? And this is work that I did at the federal level, where you, rather than starting with a textbook, you start with these resources, which are free to use, and many of them are very high quality. And then instead of investing a lot of money in a textbook that's just going to get older and older and out of date every year, you invest money in professional learning to help educators learn how to use those digital openly licensed educational resources. And they are much more flexible, they're much more affordable, and the educator can start thinking in terms of, how do these match the standards that I need to teach, as opposed to, how do I match my teaching to this textbook? So, you know, that's one possibility. Another thing that we find in those situations is, if you can create a group of teachers and focus them on one grade level or one subject area, so don't try to do it all at once, and say, how do we curate great resources that are aligned to the standards, you know, for third grade math? Then they can get a lot of learning and experience that they can then teach to the fourth grade before they go on that journey. This kind of rethinking, sort of, the target, is the target a textbook, or is the target everything that you can find on the internet? And then bringing those in to match the context of the school is a really different way of thinking about it, but one that can be very effective.
That's a really great point. And I think that if you think about some of the ISTE standards and how educators are curators of content, and all of the content that's created that might not be in a textbook, that might be more culturally responsive and have more children of color represented and things like that, or LGBTQIA, I think that those open educational resources are really important in that area, and they'll continue to be published. And if we can teach our children how to find those effectively, and our teachers, then those align, you know, right with the ISTE standards and the things that we want our children to learn.
Yeah, and I think that brings up another point, which is the whole notion of digital citizenship, right? It's really important that students learn to be effective and responsible digital citizens. And again, we've pushed them way further into that world faster than we ever meant to. But, you know, that's something we want to capitalize on. You know, now that they're out there and that they're learning those things, how do we help them not just do well at school, but how do we help them, you know, be impactful in the world as a digital citizen? How do we help them create the world that they want to live in? And so I think, you know, in some ways, this new openness that is a little bit scary to us also holds a lot of possibilities if we can embrace it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer, I think.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent conversation. Thank you. I have been rapidly taking notes. Hopefully I'll be able to understand them, given my writing. Do we have, Josh, do we have any questions? I think we can take one or two questions from the participants.
We just addressed a couple
Those
of
are,
them.
Yeah, Sarah knocked them right
all
out.
right,
She's
great.
on.
Okay, all right, then that's a great segue then to our next segment. And we'll be talking much more with on the issue of equity and community engagement. So I'm going to lob things over now to Josh.
Thank you, Jen. And Julia, I think you're gonna set the stage, and I appreciate that dialogue. Thank you, Joseph and Sarah.
Yes, just want to say thank you one more time to Joseph and Sarah. Really appreciate that look at the intersection between really high level ambitions and innovation and what implementation does and can look like at the local level. So thank you for your insights and your inspiration for all of us to continue innovating through the challenges. And we look forward to seeing where your leadership takes us in Worcester and as well as in your broader efforts. So thank you again. All right. So for our last segment tonight, we are going to shift our focus to the community level, and we will be discussing and highlighting how Worcester has come together to form the Worcester Education Equity Roundtable. The Roundtable is a coalition of partners with a commitment to equity for historically marginalized people in our pre-K to 12 public education system. Founded in early 2020, the Roundtable values and centers the voices, experience, and expertise of Worcester's youth and their families, and actively works to build capacity for leadership across the city's education ecosystem. What I love about the Roundtable work is that it's equity-driven, it's data-centered, and it's student and community focused. So for this discussion, we are welcoming Dr. Mariel Novas, the Assistant Director of Partnerships and Engagement for Massachusetts at the Education Trust. Dr. Novas, along with her colleagues at EdTrust, convenes the Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership, which is a statewide initiative that inspired the founding of the Worcester Roundtable. And we also welcome Joshua Croke, founder of Action by Design, Worcester Education Collaborative board member, and currently our facilitator for the Roundtable, for which we are so grateful, Josh. So Josh and Mariel will share so much more about the initiative, and you'll hear how this work centers high expectations and a belief in the value of holistic education while tapping into the collective power of coalitions as a mechanism for change. I'll pass it to you guys. Take it away.
Hey, everybody. It's so good to meet you. Super quickly, I just wanted to extend my introduction just a little bit. It's so great to see so many friendly faces from the Roundtable. I miss you guys deeply. So I grew up right here in Boston. I see you, Judy Kirk. I grew up right here in Boston and had the privilege of attending the Boston Public Schools for half my life. And then became a Boston Public Schools teacher after college. And so that really set me on a path of feeling what I would call almost a guttural calling to come back home and serve in my community and work with youth in particular, youth like me. And so after I was a teacher, I was an instructional coach and worked with teachers all over the eastern seaboard of our state, became a community organizer and sort of caught the bug around 2016 of advocacy and working in community, working with our families and bringing folks together. And that has only proven to be increasingly more important as the last 5 years have unfolded, and certainly currently. And so I am an education advocate, and as Julia mentioned, working with the Education Trust currently. Through that work, I convene with our state director, the Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership. And so I am super excited to share about my sort of my wonderful 3 months with the Worcester Education Equity Roundtable, which again, as Julia mentioned, was sort of kind of modeled after or thought of as a local entity that could mirror some of the work that MEEP had sort of kicked off. And so, Josh, I don't know if you wanted to also say hello, since I know you've been here the whole time, but I just came in like 20 minutes ago.
No, absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for having me. It's been humbling and an honor to step into Mariel's shoes as the facilitator of the roundtable. And we have plenty private conversations about the future of coalition building, and I'm excited to talk with you more publicly about that right now.
So this is the conversation that I would say is just deepest in my heart. And so Josh, I'm tasking you with waving me down if you're like, we're running out of time, we have things to do. So I'm gonna try to share a little bit about my few months with the roundtable and sort of what we did, what structures we attempted to set up, and a little bit about sort of the mindset and philosophy of that work, which I think is just as critical in thinking about coalition building and power building in community. So of course, the partnership, the Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership, is a statewide coalition. We're comprised now of close to 35 civil rights, social justice, and education orgs. When Jen reached out and sort of with the invitation to facilitate this roundtable and kind of get things off the ground, I was super excited about it because my heart has always been in sort of local activism, local organizing. And while it is so important to have that statewide apparatus that can have that bird's eye view and we can talk across districts, it is absolutely critical that that infrastructure also exists in every municipality. And of course, having grown up in Boston, Worcester is kind of like, these are my cousins, right? And I was eager to learn a little bit more about the conditions here in Worcester, what was happening and how we could work together. And so I joined in the summer, and I really saw my work fundamentally as being rooted in three things. The first being, give me a second, building inclusion and cohesion. And I'm gonna go into each of these with some detail. Fighting what I call disempowerment, and developing collaborative practices. I'll start first by kind of pointing to the obvious, which is the world we live in. I think it is just the greatest understatement of the century to say that we're living through a particularly divisive time, polarized time. And you know, the pandemic has kept us even more separated physically from each other than ever before. And so we find ourselves in Zoom rooms like this, which make the work of organizing a little bit more challenging, if not just different. I share that because I see the work of coalitions as being the work of the future. I see the work of coming together and building power in community as being the antidote, frankly, to the hurt, the division that we see now. Unfortunately, what we lack is sort of templates for how to make that work and how to make that happen. And I could nerd out with you all some other time about all the reasons why those templates are gone. They used to exist in our country. It used to be how things got done. But for a whole host of reasons, from the explosion of technology, the internet, sort of social movements of the 60s and 70s, we find that over time, the sort of coalitioning that would happen pretty naturally in communities just no longer was taking place in the same way. And so both in my work with MEEP and my work with the Roundtable, it was sort of an understanding that we're creating something that hasn't really been done before in this way. And so I'll start with the first thing that I mentioned, right? This need to build inclusion and cohesion. And we hear inclusion a lot, right? DEI, and sort of it's a word that's sort of elevated a lot, or sort of like a notion that is elevated a lot. But what we have seen is that it is not enough to bring bodies into a room or a Zoom room. It's not enough to say, well, like, look at our diversity and look at what we're doing. It matters how you conduct business. It matters what voices you uplift. It matters how you treat people and how you kind of tap them, right? And so I'm a former teacher, and I used to say to my students, there are no ghosts in my classroom. And I fundamentally believe that people seek to be seen and want to be seen and notice when they're seen. So when I joined the Roundtable, obviously I came in as sort of somebody who I didn't know anybody. And I was like, hey guys, I'm Mariel from Boston. And, you know, one thing that I noticed fairly quickly was the number of folks who kept their cameras off. I was like, okay. I also noticed sort of an element of like, what are we doing here, right? That kind of just like a little bit of wariness of sort of like, where's this going, right? And so for me as a facilitator, obviously, of course, step one, we have got to build trust. We have got to build relationships. And so, you know, thank God I'm a former middle school teacher, right? I've had a lot of rooms, a lot of folks, a lot of young people that I've needed to figure out, well, how do I reach you, right? And so it started off with like silly things. Like I would just like, you know, notice what pictures people had on their, on their, what do you call them? Their away message, when the thing when you're not on camera. And I'll pick on Josh, right? I remember Josh's picture looking fabulous. And I would always, I think the first few meetings, Josh, like you didn't come on camera, right? I like the ones that I was there.
Early on, it was
early on, right? But you know, the few times he would unmute and speak, I'm like, who is this person? He has really cool things to say, or they have really cool things to say. And so over time, you know, just kind of making sure I would say hi to everybody when they were in the room. Just like, and even if it was just like calling out their name, you know, Kim Davenport, who I see here, has the best backgrounds, you guys, right? She's just like serene, pastoral scenes. And so, you know, I would comment on those things, and in whatever way was necessary, just making sure that everyone knew that I knew they were there. And, you know, was very intentional with pulling in all the different voices. What do you think? Or like, I would say like, you just did something with your face. You don't agree. What do you not agree with, right? And I tried to normalize disagreement, and I don't think that's something we do often. I think we say, sure, guys, let's debate, but we don't actually invite that truly. I think people are frankly afraid of conflict, right? And so a lot of what we did in that time was just normalizing dissent, normalizing the fact that we are not always on the same page, and that is fine. That's actually what we want, right? We want all the different perspectives in a community to arise. We want to be able to engage with it, because if we, you know, members of the roundtable are thinking about this or worried about this, there are going to be many in the community who think the same thing. And I know that sometimes it was, you know, folks felt a little bit uncomfortable, like, can I actually say it, right? And so the goal is to create the psychological safety within a container for folks to feel like they can show up fully. And so that was really a huge focus of mine. And then the last thing I'll say on that point is, there's always disparity in any room, right? I'm looking at this room now, there's a range of ages, a range of experience, race, background, connectedness to community, et cetera. But there's always sort of power that moves invisibly within a space. And so I see my work as a facilitator to make power explicit, right? So I will call out, who grew up here in Worcester? What do you think about this? Or I would say, you know, who was around when this thing passed like 15 years ago? Can you give some context for what was going on back then? And I think it was helpful that I came from outside the community, because I truly didn't know a lot of things. You know, a lot of things that perhaps those who are of the community kind of just take a little bit for granted, because it's kind of, everyone knows this. But for me, you know, I was just asking questions and poking holes left and right, but kind of using myself and my own ignorance as a vehicle to normalize having questions and sort of coming forth with that. The second thing, and it's pretty huge, is around fighting disempowerment. It is, and I'm just gonna say it bluntly, right? One of the mechanisms of white supremacy and sort of white supremacist culture, and I'm using this language intentionally. I know a lot of people feel discomfort with that language, but that is what it is. Sort of the notion that white is better, stronger, higher on the totem pole. One of the many things that evokes in people, particularly those of us who have been historically marginalized or excluded in some way, is a sense of lack of agency, lack of power, lack of voice. And unfortunately, there have been systems in the city of Worcester that have made it so that folks feel pretty disempowered to create change, to move the status quo. And that was palpable. And I was, any of you who are part of the roundtable, please feel free. I can't follow along in the chat because I'll get distracted from what I'm saying, but I know you guys are here. Feel free to comment on that because, I named it pretty explicitly. And I'll be honest, the first time I named it, I was a little bit like, like, I don't know how this is going to go over, but I was like, you guys sound like you don't believe you can do this. And I'm letting that silence stay on purpose. Because it's not just folks in the roundtable. I think it's a lot of us who, even though we are in it, even though equity is sort of bursting through our hearts and justice, there's a belief that we can't do it. And that sense of disempowerment that sort of sits in our subconscious is a byproduct of oppression. Whatever, like insert oppressive system here. Right. And so when a community experiences that level of disenfranchisement over time, yes, trauma, right? That's what happens. And so a lot of my work with the roundtable was about how do I help us all rediscover and tap into our innate power? How do I and how do we remember what we are capable of doing together? And to do that work, it requires a lot of individual and intentional and collective sort of like praxis, right? Okay, I remember Lori Ross. I don't know if she's in the room, but she works at a university. The woman is brilliant, and there was one time I think she said something like, "I just don't know," and I just like invited her into a conversation. Like, Lori, what do you do every day in your classroom? Tell me about your story. Like, what have you done in the past, right? And when one person starts believing in themselves, and then another person starts saying, "Oh yeah, actually," like I remember when Isabel said, "I've been a community organizer for over 10 years," and I was like, "Isabel, why haven't you shared that before?" Right? And so like we all carry all these beautiful strengths, all these experiences, and yet we don't realize the ways in which oppression operates pretty silently and out loud, as we have seen, and it lands on us differently. And so what I really see coalitions being able to provide, the roundtable, MEEP, is a remembrance to ourselves of how powerful we are, certainly individually, but when we come together, watch out. And I would always tell the roundtable that wait until the city of Worcester knows about the work you're doing. Wait until they see what we are driving here and who's at the table and what we can do, right? And I think there are countless examples throughout history that point to that, right? When people start believing in themselves and pushing back. And then the last thing I will say is around developing collaborative practices, right? It is, again, I'm speaking from the I here. This is like very much my opinion, my belief. But what I have seen in a lot of spaces has been sort of, again, we're all together in a room and we think we're collaborating. We're really not, right? And there's a whole world of sort of research that exists. And thankfully, that's sort of the world I immerse myself in through my doctoral studies, which is how do we actually get people to team and to work together, right? And it connects to the first area of things that I discussed around building inclusion and cohesion and calling out power explicitly. But then you have to actually build the structures that allow people to work together, to debate. So we would go into breakout rooms and I would tell folks, okay, let's generate, like, what are the questions that we have? What are the constellation of possibilities? Let's dream it. Let's figure it out. Let's get strategic, right? And what do you know? And what do you know? And what do you know? Because together we know a lot. And so really try to set up those systems of engagement, and then the systems to debrief, right? To make sure that those voices in the whole group still felt equally valid, equally valuable. And it was just a really, really beautiful experience, if I'm completely honest, to see, to be received with such warmth in a community that's not my own. And to just be wrapped and sort of, and I would always tell this to the roundtable, like, I value your trust so much. You don't have to listen to anything I'm saying. Like you really don't, right? And folks did, and they trusted, and it, you know, when I stepped away at the end of September, you know, I thought long and hard about it. You can ask Jen in many different ways. She's like, you need to stay. But I really feel like local movements have to be driven by local actors. And so it's what I really wanted to create was sort of build the capacity of people in their own community to be able to drive that work forward. And in Josh, saw somebody who just a mind that I like can't even, and a heart that goes beyond beauty. And so I couldn't be more excited about where we left things off at the end of September. We had gone through sort of like the beginnings of organizing around an issue area, and had sort of started to think about, all right, what's our, like, given that this is the stake, the thing we're putting on the ground, what does it look like to move this forward? How do we get the community involved? What is our vision for impact, right? And so like really exciting stuff. So I'm gonna put a comma there, and I will let Josh pick it up.
Thank you, Mariel. Humbled as always to follow you, and so value and appreciate you and all the work that you've done and helped support with the development of the coalition, the forming of those relationships. My passion is asking the question of how do we build inclusive innovation ecosystems by centering belonging and the cultural humility and intelligence in everything that we do, and feeling valued in these spaces is so critical and crucial. And thank you for making me feel that way. And also I know that sentiment is echoed from so many others at the round table, hearts all around. And I think, you know, it's not business as usual anymore. Like what you were saying, coalition building, so many of us are bringing our full selves to this space, and that comes with an emotional tax sometimes. It comes with heavy conversation, that comes with uncomfortable conversation and discussion that we are not all used to having sitting on, you know, a work Zoom. But so much of this work is about our passion and our motivation and understanding and unraveling and trying to dismantle systems of oppression. And I really believe coalition building is how we do that. So thank you again for enabling that work to continue in Worcester and in the community. I think the other piece that you mentioned that resonates so strongly with me is like the community-centered approach to coalition building, of going to local actors, going to people who have lived here for their whole lives, people who have moved here recently, who are experiencing Worcester in a new way, and asking them to step up and lead, be at the table, and drive decision-making. You know, my work is around amplifying community power, and how do we do that? It's through relationship building, and then it's through doing the work. And by bringing so many people together, and Julia, I think you have a slide to showcase the incredible amount of partners that we have built in this past year for the roundtable, is a testament to how powerful these coalitions can be in the work that we can do. Highlight some of that work that we've done in the community, really in our infancy. Over this past year, we held 2 community events. In May, we held a summer learning in Worcester Synergy and Synthesis Summit, which was talking about what needs of our young people have emerged during this pandemic. What are the questions we need to be asking ourselves? What do we need to be focusing on and addressing to ensure that equity and excellence is still a center point of education while we are facing new challenges in our community and in this country? And also the power of coalition building coming from understanding the local component of that, and how everything is local in a way, but there is also partnerships and best practices that can be shared statewide, that can be shared region-wide, that can be shared nationally, that we can bring into our work. And coalitions are a way to talk about these things, organize them, and take action on them. In August, we had a New Ways of Teaching and Learning, Opportunities and Challenges forum that We spoke with the superintendent, Paul Matthews, who's here from the Research Bureau, Zeno Link, Sarah Robinson from the UMass Donahue Institute. We really looked at how do we understand what's next? How do we understand what's working and what's not? How do we, again, bring these conversations together? We had our first co-signed op-ed published in Commonwealth Magazine as a roundtable talking about uneven and inequitable access to technology and resources like access to the internet and devices. And we have also amplified the social and emotional learning work through receiving a grant from Worcester Together to enhance trainings for teachers, youth workers, juvenile justice professionals. And these new modules have included COVID-19 as community trauma and bringing voice to a trauma that we're all experiencing right now in 2020. Also talking about racism as trauma and addressing that with teachers and educators and people who are interacting with and engaging in the lives of young people and families in our community. And we've made incredible strides forward with our WULabs initiative, which is a core group of partners working at responding to an increased and elevated need for out-of-school time learning and looking at how do we envision and amplify that work as a community. And so with all of that incredible work comes a continuation of building and maintaining that trust and continuing to establish existing and forming new relationships to really help further this work. And that does come with its challenges. How do you keep a community engaged? How can we continue to define roles and expectations so people feel that they're a valued voice at this table and the capacity in which they're able to be there? And how can we really amplify that work and move that forward? And the other thing I think is really important is all these organizations that are coming together as partners are doing work outside of the round table. And I think sometimes when people come together for convenings, oftentimes it's looking at how to bring all of that work together to the center to work, in a collaborative way. But I think there's an important piece of coalition building around what is the role and what is not the role of that coalition, so you can further, the action-based work that you can do collaboratively as a team, knowing that when people step away, they're continuing their work independently. So we're really looking at how do we just continue to bring people together. And I'm going to segue into a brief chat between me and Mariel about some of the evolving nature of the roundtable in both, in Massachusetts and nationally, by referencing because I can't ask the question any better myself. And I told Mariel the other day that I just started reading Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. I'm literally 12 pages in, but this question, I think, is so potent to the work that we're doing. And it's, how do we turn our collective full-bodied intelligence towards collaboration if that is the way we will survive? And I'm going to leave that there for you, Mariel, to pick up.
Oh, you're asking me to answer?
Explore the topic, because I think, the roundtable's participation with MEEP and other, we had a conversation the other day of what if, and, getting in our big picture conversations of what if the roundtable existed in the regions across the state.
That's right.
And we were able to echo this work into other communities and again, share best practices, but continue the local advocacy work that's so necessary in our community.
Absolutely. And, I'm trying to figure out where to start my response and how deep to go. How much time do we have?
We have like 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay.
I
was about to go back to like the founding of this country. Okay, let me just bring it back. You get a sneak peek, everybody, into how my brain works. It's scary up there. And Josh and I can speak for, oh my gosh, I did one of his of their podcasts and it was like 2 hours. So what I absolutely love about Adrienne Marie Brown's work and just sort of this conversation that we're having is it goes back to just a really basic principles around community organizing for me. And again, you sort of already heard me say this, the importance of having homegrown leadership the people most impacted by a system, by inequities, by whatever. And, you know Ayanna Pressley, if you followed her campaign, always would say the people closest to the pain have to be closest to the power. And I'm just going to echo that and name it here. We see a situation across our state that is absolutely untenable. And I am sorry that I'm not going to offer numbers and percentages in this moment. I'm probably going to get them wrong, but I'll just say this. In cities like Worcester, like Chelsea, like Lawrence, and I could go on and name them, Springfield, we see a situation where we have masses of people living in these communities, largely folks of color in these gateway cities, and systems of power that continue to remain largely white, if not exclusively white. That is a problem that all of us should feel deeply uncomfortable living in. Deeply uncomfortable. And I'm gonna say something that I've said to Josh, but I haven't said it in a room as big as this, but I'm just gonna call it out. It mirrors a plantation. When you have the workers being largely people of color, being run by folks in power who are white. And we should be really uncomfortable with that. And so what I see in coalition building is the ability of the ground of folks, regular people who don't have the title, who don't have the keys, being able to recognize that the power does reside with us. And coming together to actualize, operationalize that power, and to actually be a sort of a contender. And this is how I would speak about this within the roundtable. I would ask folks sort of like, who are the holders of power in Worcester, right? When you do kind of like landscape analyses or power mapping, asset mapping, and where's the community in that? Who holds that? Who can challenge the school district? Who can challenge sort of like the city manager? Who is able to do that, that can speak with authority on behalf of, or not even on behalf of, with, and letting our families be the one who actually are speaking the agenda, right? And so I know I see you unmuting, Josh, which probably means that I'm at time. And I know that I'm like throwing big things out there, but these are the big things that we have to contend with if we really think about how do you break intergenerational and generational poverty? How do you empower and uplift communities? How do you move? We talk about building middle class and sort of the rhetoric of American politics all the time. Well, how do you do that? How do you support people? I'm sorry, Josh, I see it, right? Like, how do you support people in being able to break chains? And so that's what I see. That's the beauty, the potential and power that I see in things like the roundtable, like MEEP, and imagine an education equity roundtable in every major city in this state. Imagine a Josh Croke being able to sort of shepherd a community of advocates in Holyoke, in Lawrence, in Brockton, and then being able to come together through organizations like MEEP to kind of compare notes and say, okay, what's happening over here and what's working, what's not working, how can we share resources? It's a completely different world, right? And so like, that's for me, the world that I wake up for. There have been many, 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 many mornings this year when it is hard to get out of bed. And I know that I'm not the only one in that position, right? But the only way that I get to wake up in this body as a Black woman, as an immigrant in this country, somebody who, in so many ways has felt under assault by our own government. The only way I get to wake up and believe in myself and believe in my community and believe that there is a better tomorrow than right now is believing in everything I just said. So thank you guys so much for the opportunity to say what I'm saying, to be able to work with you. And again, to those of you from the roundtable who are in the room, I love you all more than you know, and I think about you all the time. I'm right here. Things are just crazy, so I haven't been able to come back to a meeting, but Josh, I'll end it there, and I hope that our conversations continue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mariel, for bringing your honesty and like laying down truth that is so necessary to be talking about. For folks who have participated in and been a part of the roundtable, thank you so much for your commitment and the work. And for those who want to get involved, please reach out to WEC, reach out to me, and we will connect you to this work. It is a community effort, and it is something that we will all do together. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mariel. We miss you, darling. And as you know, you are always welcome. And we always, you know, I again, someone who I have notes that I hope I can read tomorrow. But we really do appreciate the, you know, the radical truth telling and the radical belief in what we're all capable of. So thank you for that. I'm going to lob things over just briefly to Julia, who's going to bring us into the last part of our program.
Thank you, Jen. Yes, thank you, Mariel. Thank you, Josh. Your leadership is such an inspiration. I can tell from all the chats, comments that I'm not the only one who is moved and humbled and really ready to go to work after your comments tonight. So we'd like to, before we close things out, we wanted to just make one more appeal for you to join in on the fundraising efforts if you haven't already. There are lots of different ways that you can contribute. The auction will be open until 7 p.m. So make sure you get any bids in before then. Encourage you to purchase a school supply kit through our Fund a Need initiative, which will provide a remote learning kit for a Worcester Public School student. And as you've heard throughout the evening, students really are at the heart of everything that we do at WEC. And this is a small but powerful way to support their learning through the winter. All right. And with that, I'll turn it over to our incoming board chair, who will close us out for the evening. Kate Salmon-Robinson holds degrees in sociology, education, and health services management and policy, and has spent nearly 25 years helping to run Salmon Health and Retirement, her family's business. And Kate serves on the board of directors for Unibank and Salmon, and is now WEC's incoming board chair. Take it away, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope everybody is feeling as energized as I am, because I'm just so excited about the programs, the speakers, and everything else. So thank you. As we wrap things up this evening, I want to take a moment and ask you to just think about collaboration. I have to tell you that I didn't see Amy's video until the first part of this meeting. You know the saying about great minds. But in my time with the Worcester Education Collaborative, it's that last bit, it's the C that truly resonates with me. You know, akin to cooperation, at its most basic level, collaboration is working together to complete a task or a goal. And without a doubt, successful collaboration requires leadership. And WEC is blessed to have Jennifer Davis Carey, who's supported by a visionary founding board, excuse me, and a visionary founding board and dedicated current board members. She leads a talented team of staff and committed volunteers. I continue to be impressed by Jen's strategic thinking on everything from education to diversity, equity, inclusion, and beyond. Jen comfortably and effectively collaborates with other community and educational leaders on a day-to-day basis. We are so fortunate that she develops and nurtures sincere and trusting relationships that help us achieve our goals. Jen's, sort of echoing Jen's praise for our founding board member and our outgoing chair, I'm especially grateful to Patty Eppinger for her keen insight, her thoughtful guidance, and her positive influence. Moving forward, I plan to work closely with both of these strong, bright women. I know I speak for many when I express our shared gratitude and appreciation to all of our sponsors, supporting foundations, and individual donors for their generous financial commitment to our mission and organization. Together, they are a key part of the collaborative effort that drives our results. And speaking of cooperation, camaraderie, and communication, we have our fearless leader, Jen, our Deputy Director, Julia Kilgore, and Joshua Croke, founder of Action by Design, to thank for bringing us this dynamic, relevant, pandemic-friendly annual meeting. And before we all sign off, I want to express how truly honored I am to stand alongside each of you as part of WEC, a truly insightful, forward-thinking, and productive collaboration. Now more than ever, our community needs WEC. In the coming year, I hope that you stay connected and engaged with WEC as we make history and we continue to advocate for, collaborate with, and deliver results on behalf of the children and families of the Worcester Public Schools. I say thank you and good night, but almost. We have one final order of business, and that is I will entertain a motion to conclude WEC's 2020 annual meeting.
So moved.
Seconded?
Second.
Excellent. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Good night. Please bid in the auction and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Thanks, everyone.
Great job.